what these changes are doing is that they're already affecting the lives of people around the world. And so to illustrate some examples, CO2 traps heat. And so this is that basic greenhouse gas effect. This melts ice, melting ice from glaciers, as you can see behind in this slide. These glaciers are melting, they're increasing the level, the sea level. So rising sea levels are a pretty significant issue. On top of that, as this fresh water feeds into the ocean systems, it decreases the salinity of the ocean. So it reduces the amount of salt in water, which affects ecosystems and the ability of certain life to thrive and just creates some pretty significant changes. This increases extreme weather events. And so when these different areas of the globe are heating or cooling at a more rapid pace, we get more extreme events, like a more extreme El Nino, we get stronger hurricanes, more aggressive floods and monsoons and that type of thing. And it also warms the oceans. As water heats up, it expands. And it may not seem that significant if you heat a glass of water on your desk. When you're heating the entire ocean, that level begins to rise even further than just the glaciers feeding into it. And on top of that, when it warms up, it's able to absorb more CO2 and it increases in acidity, which affects ocean ecosystems. On top of that, from a human perspective, we lose food resilience. Our agricultural systems completely depend on the natural environment. In cities these days, we feel kind of disconnected from our agricultural systems, but they're there and they're incredibly important to the survival of our societies. And what happens is when climate's changing, growing seasons change. And so you lose that ability to predict when things are going to happen and how your season is going to come out and what your yield is going to be when you may have a drought or you may have a flood or your season starts a couple months later. And on top of this, these changing conditions help pests and diseases thrive in different areas. We've seen some pests move from central areas on the globe, the central area near the equator, and move north. And so they affect ecosystems that hadn't been used to them before. And it really is affecting major forests and agricultural establishments. And then extreme events hurt yields. If you have a drought one year, your yield will decrease. If you have a flood in an area, it may affect your yields. And this is especially significant in monocrop kind of areas. On top of that, from an individual level, this hurts our health. So hot air in the atmosphere rises up. And what it does is when there's smog caused by emissions from whether it be car tailpipes or energy generation plants, that smog, that particulate matter, is trapped low down below that hot air. And so it stays where we're actually breathing it. This is why you see such extreme weather in such extreme smog and health issues in places like Mexico City and Beijing, in Los Angeles, these places that are in valleys that have this extreme effect as the hot weather rises. Heat waves are a significant challenge in cities these days. Even in Paris and modern cities in North America and Europe, we're seeing that when temperatures exceed 45 degrees Celsius in the summer, for extended periods of time, air conditioning becomes a life support system. Many people are unable to survive in those conditions for very long, especially the most vulnerable in our society, which is elders and malnourished people. And then extreme events cause damage. We've seen this locally here in Ottawa and Montreal in this last year. We've had major floods that have affected our infrastructure, pulled people from their homes, and affected people's quality of life in a very significant way. And this will continue to increase. And finally, biodiversity suffers. So when ecosystems change, habitats change. As I said before, if we look at the oceans, as the salinity level rises and the salinity level decreases and the acidity rises, what we see is that coral reefs are being increasingly threatened. Coral reefs house over 90% of ocean biodiversity. And so to threaten those ecosystems puts a major strain on our food sources as fishers, as they are a major carbon sink. So as we start to affect these coral ecosystems, they release carbon that they had sequestered in the form of life. As we know, carbon is the base of life. And so when you kill living systems, this is why deforestation is one of the very significant issues. When you kill a living system, it re-emits that carbon back into the world to be used either for atmospheric pollution or other ways. And so, like I said before, we're also more prone to things like pests in general forests as well as agricultural establishments. Now, I don't want to get too down and doom and gloom about this whole thing. We do face some very significant challenges, and I want to lay that out for you. But there are massive opportunities, and people aren't just sitting by for the not the entire world is just sitting by and doing nothing. There's a big subset of people who are deciding to act, because as you can see, once you start to understand the science a little bit, as I've gone through it just a surface level, it's hard not to take action on these issues.